Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. Today I have with me a return guest, Dean Wood, N6DE, and his friend John Owens, N6U. Over a period of time, talking to a lot of different contesters and Parks on the Air people, it's been obvious to me that there's quite an intersection between the two, or at least potential for an intersection. And when I was speaking with Dean, he had some ideas around this, so I thought that I'd have John and Dean on board to have that conversation. Dean, thank you for joining me.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks for having me back. Great to talk to you again.
So before we get into the actual content, it's always helpful for our listeners to know a little bit about your backgrounds. John, why don't we start with you? A little bit about your ham radio background, please.
Sure, thanks. And thanks, Kevin, for having me on. So I actually missed an opportunity to get into ham radio when I was a teenager back in Boy Scouts because I was just way too shy, and then forgot about it for a long time. And as a pandemic hobby, I got into off-roading. And originally, I was just looking for better ways to communicate on the trail, communicate with fellow off-roaders, and so I got into ham radio for that more practical purpose. But then I discovered all the fun parts of the hobby: awards, contesting, parks on the air, DXing, and the hobby's kind of flipped in importance for me. And so now the main use for my Jeep is to get my radios up as high as possible.
It's a great backstory. I love that. And Dean, why don't you give us a refresher on your background?
Sure. Got my ham license in high school in electronics class. Licensed in 1990, and then I joined my my college amateur radio club. Got interested in contesting, joined the Northern California Contest Club, and I've been involved in contesting ever since.
Dean, let's get right into this intersection that you believe exists between Parks on the Air activators and contesters.
Maybe a good place to start is talking about barriers to entry for HF contesting. Do you remember the interview you had with Bill, W9KKN? He's made a lot of terrific points in your videos. And one point that he made, which we should talk a little bit more about, is the barrier to entry to HF contesting. Traditionally, how you enter HF contesting is you build a station at home and you operate from home. I would say that has more barriers now than ever before, whether it's noise, in the neighborhood, whether it's regulations, whether it's neighbors. Building a home station creates a pretty big barrier. So what's the alternative to that? Well, one alternative that a lot of your guests, the contest crew and others have pursued is building a fixed station away from home, maybe in the Caribbean, maybe nearby them in the same state. That's a great solution. It takes a massive commitment of time, and there's a financial commitment there too. What are some of the other avenues? What are some of the other paths that you can break through these barriers to entry in contesting? I think there are probably two other good ones that I can think of. One is what I've been very fortunate to be involved with, and that is operating from other fixed stations. I've been very lucky to operate from a lot of different fixed stations in California as well as across the globe. But what if you don't have that opportunity? What's another opportunity to create a path to HF contesting? It's portable operating. And I would say that the barrier to portable operating is lower than it probably ever has. Portable radios are probably the best they've ever been. Portable antennas, there's a lot of different options. Portable masts, portable power sources, whether you're talking about a battery technology these days or bringing a fairly light generator. There's a lot of opportunity there without building your own station at home first to go the portable operating route in contesting. And not a lot of people think of that as an option locally. People tend to think of that for de-expeditions, like, for example, Team Vertical, Kenny, K2KW, spearheading that whole team has done a tremendous job operating contests from DX. There are guys who go to Mauritius. There are many other examples of that, but you don't tend to think of that so much in contests locally. going somewhere portable locally and participating in a contest. And that's where I think we have the opportunity to talk more about what those options are and what competitive advantages there are to doing that over even creating your station at home.
Well, first of all, that's a fascinating perspective because you're right. I've never really thought of that. I talked to a lot of people, including Kenny, K2KW, a lot of people that pack up portably and have significant operations, whether it be in contests or otherwise, in locations that aren't their home, typically the Caribbean or other locations. So this idea that if we can do that to go to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, why wouldn't you be able to do that in Maine? And again, you may not be competing with a guy with 3 towers and multiple Yagis, but you get to pick your location, right? You can be next to the salt water, and you have a lot of advantages. And most importantly, you get on the air and you can make some contacts. John, what's your perspective on that intersection between parks on the air and contesting?
Absolutely. I love contesting from POTA parks and other remote locations. I do face at least one of the challenges that Dean mentioned. I have a home station set up with an in-fed half wave in my backyard, and there's a very large noise floor in my neighborhood, just electrical wires, all those sorts of things. So it's not very effective. So besides enjoying the outdoors for its own sake, I can go someplace where the noise floor can be nearly zero out in nature. So that's nice. There's also a challenge of finding a good location. So I can find locations with nice drop-offs in the direction I want to work, like on a ridge or on a peak. Or if I'm, Dean mentioned saltwater, if I'm trying to reach Asia or Oceania, almost every beach in California where I live is a state park. So that's also a parks on the air location. And I usually operate from my Jeep, mostly with vertical antennas, so I can do kind of a drive-up operation. But for some longer contests like sweepstakes, I'll set up a number of different antennas and operate. I've operated from a cabin in Clear Lake State Park for the last 2 years. And again, as Dean mentioned, I'm not competitive with the folks with the super stations and the massive Yagis. In fact, in Clear Lake, if anyone knows N6ZFO, Bill, he's had a station on a mountaintop in Clear Lake, pretty much right over my shoulder, and he does amazing things. And then I'm just sitting in his shadow down there running low power. But I won, number one San Francisco section in sweepstakes SSB 2 years in a row. Last year got 200 QSOs on 5 bands, and that counted as 3 parks on the air activations because that went across 3 different UTC days. So it's a lot of fun in its own right. Most contesters are familiar with field day, of course. In parks on the air, we have a saying that every day is field day. So those same challenges of what kind of antenna do I want to set up? Is this going to work better if I do it this way? What happens when the storm blows over my vertical, as happened last year, and I switched to my buddy pole? These are part of what makes it interesting and challenging.
Well, I want to underscore this idea that parks on the air activators have an option of where they can activate. I know there are many parks on the air people that just want to get into a park, get their 10 QSOs and be able to record the activation, which is fine. But you're right, if you want to go to that park and do, say, 100, 150 QSOs per hour, and maybe over extended hours, there's a lot of options out there. I can tell you out of the dozens of parks that I've activated in the state of Maine, I know exactly where I would go and have gone for a contest. It's on the water's edge, it's an easy access point, and I've proven that the propagation always works really well there. So, and I think that adds an additional level of interest. It's a lot of fun to be able to figure that out and maybe not go back to a park that isn't quite as helpful.
Yeah, I agree, Kevin. There's one thing I do want to talk about, put it out there. There's, from the contesting side, I would say there might be a little bit of a misconception that we may have about POTA operations, where it could be thought that POTA operations have to be operations that where you're weak, you make 10 QSOs, you stay for an hour, you go to a local park, and you leave. And it doesn't really have to be that way. Without knowing the facts and without having talked to John and N6U a little bit more about this, I did not know that there were 389 different POTA locations in the state of California where you can operate. And they are not local parks or they're not county parks. POTA locations are state and federal managed locations. Big ones in California are national forests. And I was looking to see how big the amount of area is in the state of California for simply just national forests, USFS. It is the size of the state of Maine that we can operate in the state of California only from national forests, forgetting state parks, forgetting other areas that qualify as POTA locations. So that's huge. The other thing I want to highlight is a number of people have probably operated from a POTA location and not even known it. In CQP 2023, the California QSO Party last year, we had 60 portable stations between expeditions and mobiles. 27 of those were from POTA locations, almost half, operating from 22 different POTA locations. Guess how many QSOs that those 27 stations made? 14,240 QSOs in one contest in a QSO party. That's not 10 QSOs. So it's getting past that mindset that POTA, you have to be, it has to be temporary. It has to be an hour. It has to be 10 QSOs. No, there's a lot of opportunity to make a lot of QSOs from advantageous locations. We'll get into the competitive advantages a little later today. One thing that I looked at, Kevin, is I've operated from a number of portable locations in California for the California QSO Party. And I did some looking and mapping where I located to the locations list on POTA.app. Turns out either single op or being part of a multi-op contest in CQP. I've been a part of 20,175 QSOs from POTA locations over the last 10 or over a 10-year span. And it's not because I'm the caliber of the operators who you talk to every week, Kevin. It's because I'm operating from an advantageous location where I can hear and where I can put up a decent antenna.
So there's a lot of different directions that we can go in and will go in. But I want to go back to this idea that the California QSO Party has an expedition class. And it's called different things in different state QSO parties, but there's oftentimes a rover, expedition, mobile class. Talk to me a little bit about that, Dean. What is that, and how does that apply to a lot of state QSO parties?
In the California QSO Party, we have an expedition, what you could call it an overlay. We call it a special award category. It's the same thing. Expedition, one-day expedition. So you can go to a SOTA park, a SOTA location, a POTA location, operate for the day. You're not competing with people who stay the whole weekend. You can be on a county line. That's another special award category. And you can be a mobile. Those are 4 different ways that you can participate portable in CQP. And John last year participated portable as a mobile station from a POTA location, actually several, right, John?
Yeah, that's right. Picked out a few POTA locations, operated mobile from my Jeep. Started out on Fremont Peak State Park, which is also a county line location for the California QSO Party. Went from there to a few other locations near some beaches. There's a county line station in San Francisco, so I was able to give out San Francisco and San Mateo County. And that's nice in the California QSO Party because some counties don't get covered very well, and there aren't a lot of people in there. So people thanked me for being their first San Francisco County contact, for being their first San Benito County contact, etc. So I was able to cover a lot of ground in the Jeep.
So one of the things this brings up for me is the exchange. Obviously, with any contest, there's some sort of exchange that needs to happen. Most of us know that a Parks in the Air activator traditionally has given out the park number. Talk to me about that.
Just as Dean was mentioning, there's some, maybe myths in the contesting community about POTA. The other way around is true as well. I was just in a conversation on Facebook yesterday where some POTA operators had some misconceptions about what's required for doing parks on the air. in Parks on the Air, there is no required exchange. You just need to exchange, obviously, call signs and some information, whatever that is. You don't need to say CQ POTA. You don't need to mention your park number. You don't even need to mention that you're in a park if you don't want to. So it's 100% compatible by design with contesting. So whatever the exchange is for whatever contest is going on at the time, just give them that exchange. When I do contesting from a POTA park, I sometimes work people who are not in the contest, and I'll just kind of talk them through what information they need. If, for example, in the California QSO Party, it's like, what county are you in? And if they don't know, that's fine. But if they do know, then I can count that as a contest exchange. So you don't need to necessarily say CQ Parks on the Air to be doing a POTA activation.
So I suppose the other advantage, John, is that POTA has a great spotting system. So as long as self-spotting is allowed, and I believe it is in most state QSO parties, then you have a great system to get noticed on your frequency.
There's two sides to that, right? So obviously, if you're going to participate actively in a contest, check the contest rules. The California QSO Party, for example, does not allow self-spotting. But the POTA spotting side is very active. So if I'm on the air and I mention, I'll say CQ contest and CQ parks on the air, and someone might ask me for my park number. And if they do, I can't ask them to spot me, but if a POTA hunter gets my park number, they often will. And then I'll get a tremendous number of calls from that. If you're in a contest that does allow self-spotting and you're doing POTA, go ahead and do that. You also have the option, if your main motivation is parks on the air and you happen to be there during a contest weekend, which I consider a target-rich environment. A lot of POTA activators try to avoid contests. I look at it exactly the opposite. It's a target-rich environment, a great way to get a lot of contacts. So if you want to spot yourself, that's fine, and then you can either just not submit a log for the contest, or you can submit it as a check log, meaning I'm not actually going for a score, but here's the contacts that I made. So it's perfectly acceptable to do that if you're not participating in the contest for an award, and go ahead and spot yourself and make all the contacts you want.
So one of the things I'd like to discuss also is this barrier to entry, and Dean, you've already addressed this, that operating portably, it's a lot easier and maybe even less expensive. You don't need as much gear. However, on the other side of that, you can actually operate power from a POTA location. You can have multiple antennas. Do either of you have experience doing that?
I mentioned earlier Clear Lake State Park. I usually get a cabin there, and the cabin has AC power. So if I wanted to bring an amp, at least a 120 volt amp, I could certainly do that. I have set up multiple antennas, so I can go back and forth between. I've loaded vertical, 17-foot telescoping whip, buddy pole, some wire antennas, and I found the best cabin at Clear Lake State Park that has a nice fenced-in area, so nobody's going to trip on all my radio wires and everything. And I'll set up multiple antennas there and try different ones at different times. So that's absolutely quite doable.
Cabin where I've done most of my portable operating in CQP is from national forests, and if you're doing primitive camping, as long as you have a what do they call it, a fire permit, you can run a generator as long as it has a spark arrestor. And so most of the operations I would say that I've done portable have been high power, and usually you don't think of it that way for POTA, but that's been my experience. I have done some low power efforts as well, portable, and I've invested in one of these cool batteries that you're not lugging around a lead acid battery anymore with you to portable locations. They have gotten a lot lighter, run 100 watts, and you're in business.
Well, one of my personal experiences was running a contest out of Acadia National Park, a POTA location, actually K0001 at the time, now US, but I was able to get a campsite. I was able to put up a vertical as well as a buddy hex, and ran 500 watts and made 1,500 contacts over the course of the weekend in pouring rain, absolutely miserable conditions. But the challenge of setting up portably and having those sort of options was truly a lot of fun. So I do think opening up that possibility for people, that doesn't mean you have to. You can still run a QRP entry or a low power entry, but just that possibility that you could do high power, have multiple antennas, I think adds just one other layer of interest to the hobby. Dean, I know you have some statistics that you wanted to share with us today, so why don't I pass that over to you and you can walk us through some of these.
Maybe another topic we should talk about is what competitive advantage does a portable location offer? Usually you would think there would be a disadvantage. You would think that you would put up a wire, a random length wire as high as you could, and it would be a high disadvantage versus what you would be able to put up at home. And I want to talk to that. The one, probably the biggest benefit, competitive advantage for contesters is a lower noise floor. John just hit on this, and his situation is not unique. I bet many people watching this have a similar situation at home. Their noise floor is not S0, S1. It may not even be S5, S7. It may be S9. And so simply moving to a location where you can hear is a major competitive advantage. But in addition to that, terrain can be a big advantage. And Kevin and John, you guys mentioned saltwater. That is a big advantage. But let's say you don't have saltwater by you. What other competitive advantage does terrain give you? And so I want to show a couple of plots here that that explore that. John and I were planning to operate the IARU contest just last month from a POTA location. It's about an hour drive from my house. And so I did a little checking to see how good is this location. So this is the terrain as shown from HFTA. That I think others have shown on your program before, Kevin, in 3 different directions. This blue is the terrain toward Europe, red is the terrain toward Japan, and green is the terrain toward the US. All 3 of them drop off at least a couple hundred feet within the first 1,000 feet. And then JA and Europe keep dropping off. And so I wanted to explore, well, what kind of advantage is that giving us as far as an advantage at low angles versus what I might be able to put up at home, which is I'm on flat terrain here at home. Let's look at that. I did some analysis for 15 and 20 to JA and Europe, which are probably the biggest bands out here in IARU to a DX location. And what did I see? Let's start off with 15 to Europe. Red is if I had put up a dipole in my backyard at home. Red is the response over flat terrain. And blue is the response toward Europe at the park that we were planning to operate at that location. And so the purple bars are statistics bars in HFTA from W6, northern W6 to Europe in general over an entire sunspot cycle. What kind of distribution of angles would you see over a whole sunspot cycle? Where would they be? And even within a particular day, these change. They change from the beginning of the opening to the middle of the opening to the end of the opening for sure. So a big takeaway here, though, that a lot of people know is that from California to DX, especially Europe, requires low angles. And what kind of advantage am I seeing? Let's look at the highest probable, or let's look at 4 degrees, let's say. At 4 degrees elevation, takeoff angle, we're looking at in my backyard, minus 3 dBi. And at the park that John and I were going to operate, we're looking at about 8 dBi. That difference is, what, 11 dB? What can you get if you were at home? What would you need to do to gain 11 dB in your antenna system? Well, this assumes the same antenna dipole. Let's see, if you went to a 5-element Yagi, let's say you went to a monobander at home at the same height, you would get about 8 dB over this. And so I would need a 5-element monobander, and I would need to get some more height. Both of these assume 30 feet off the ground. I would need to get some more height to even equal the low angle response that we're looking at here. Similar story in different directions. We have 15 to Japan. We're looking at, if you look at 4 degrees takeoff, -3 to 5, so that's 8 dB at the low angle, while it's pretty much mimicking a flat response at the higher angles. Let's look at what 20 looks like to Europe. Similar story. If you look especially at the lower angles here, it's over 10 dB that you're seeing, which is a world of difference. Even if you're looking at, let's say, during the middle of the opening, the angles became higher. Let's look at 9 degrees. 9 degrees, we're looking at 0 dB versus, 5 dB? You're getting 5 dB better from this POTA Park location, assuming the same antenna and power. This is a huge competitive advantage. People look for a few dB advantages at their fixed station. What can they do at their fixed station? And if you can find a POTA location like this in target locations to DX, usually one might also have the misconception that POTA means you're doing invis or you're doing kind of close-in contacts. But this is showing a major advantage to DX. From a POTA location. That's a big game changer right there for contesting. And so I would say with both of those, lower noise and then terrain advantages, you have created a real competitive advantage.
Dean, this is great stuff. I love the analysis. Take it a step further for me. So I'm a POTA activator. I have a gut feeling of where I should go. How can I do this analysis from my home for a location that might be 75 miles away?
If you know what the POTA location is, looking at the POTA webpage, John, did they have lat longe on the POTA.app?
The POTA.app website has a specific latitude longitude point that gives you a spot on the map, but that's really just for general location. The parks in the air rules are that you have to be on public property within the boundaries of the park. There's some other rules for trails and such, but that's the basic one. And the POTA app website does not actually tell you the park boundaries. It does generally have a link to the park's own website where you can find the park boundaries, but I'll tell you what I use is an app called Gaia GPS. And in Gaia GPS, there is an overlay called public land. And the public land overlay has really good park boundaries. And also I use it to validate that I'm on public land if I've found a place to park or a place to set up. I can click the point, I can find out what county I'm in, I can find out what, if I'm in one or more parks, so they often sometimes overlap. The other thing I use the Gaia GPS for is to look for this good terrain. So I haven't gotten into the math to the level that Dean has and doing all this analysis, but just visually looking at where the drop-offs are and being able to find a spot that's not going to be occluded by other terrain, things like that, using something like Gaia GPS. There's others as well. Onyx Off-Road is another one. Can get you you can do some kind of pre-scouting before you go out to the park and find a good location that way.
Kevin, what I used to do before the POTA days is I just brought up Google Earth. I looked for what looked like an advantageous location. I got the lat longe of that, and then I created my terrain profile and then inputted it into HFTA. It's gotten a lot easier now. You can go to k6tu.net and enter the lat longe of any location that you want to analyze. It will spit out terrain profiles in a 360-degree circle, and then you launch the program and run some simulations.
So let's talk about Parks on the Air activator skill level. What prepares a POTA activator to be a contester?
I got into Parks on the Air before I got into contesting, and discovered contesting through being in Parks in the Air and having the contest happening at the time and saying, okay, what's going on with this and what are these people doing? But I think that with Parks on the Air activations, you build the skills of, as we were talking about, figuring out where to set up, setting up antennas, setting up your radio, working, in a variety of different conditions and variety of different weather conditions. If you are doing Parks on the Air where you do spot yourself or you get spotted, you can build up some pretty good pileups. So the handling of pileups, if you're calling CQ during a contest, that skill you can also build up on Parks on the Air. The biggest pileup I got during a non-contest in POTA was when I'd parked my Jeep right on a county line and got spotted on both the POTA site and the county hunters net, and just got this huge pileup that went on for about 45 minutes of people looking for the two counties that I was on. So if you have that skill from doing POTA, you'll do really well in contests. But you can also just search and pounce, hunt around, look for contests, listen to the contesters. There's a lot of discussion in the POTA community where people say, oh, I couldn't find a clear spot. Oh, this has been a contest weekend. Let me go off to 12 meters or something where there aren't any contesters. I think, embrace that, right? Look for those, all those contacts that you can make. Look for the target-rich environment, as I mentioned, and just as you've built up the skill in search and search and pounce during POTA, where you're calling out or calling park to park if you're finding another park activator and breaking through that pileup, you can do that from that end as well in the contest. So it can be very similar.
Can either of you speak to Parks on the Air, their history with contesting, and how receptive that community has been to contesting?
The Parks on the Air organization and the folks that originated that intentionally made the POTA rules as simple and low barrier to entry, as we were talking about earlier, as possible. So it's entirely compatible with DXing, it's entirely compatible with contesting. So there's no organizational barrier at all. There have been, we were talking earlier about myths. There have been these kind of ideas that have sprung up in the community where people who maybe even haven't read the POTA documentation necessarily have these ideas about this is the one way to do POTA, and they find it not being compatible with contesting. And everybody runs their activations their own way. You do you. That's great. But if you haven't experienced doing Parks on the Air during a contest and making a higher volume of contacts and getting that little bit of an adrenaline rush, give it a try. It's definitely worthwhile.
John, why do you think that Parks on the Air haven't embraced their own contest, a Parks on the Air contest?
I think some people just haven't really embraced contesting. There's also a little bit of a cultural difference or a tone difference. Some POTA activators are very happy to go through things at kind of a rapid clip, right? They'll say, hey, let me see how many contacts I can make, and 59 California, next, and it sounds like a contest. Other Parks on the Air activators enjoy the chatting and just rag chewing a bit, or hey, what kind of antenna? Hey, the weather here is whatever. And if you're a POTA activator who enjoys doing that, that's wonderful. But it doesn't work very well with contesters, and so they end up not having not a good experience. So my advice to that would just be adapt to the time, and if you want to rag chew on a contest weekend, yeah, sure, go over to 17 meters or something. But if you want to give that contesting experience a try and see how many different how many contacts you can make, but also the locations as well. So trying to get as many different states as possible, or DX as well. And POTA is not just a U.S. thing, right? POTA has been expanding across the world. There are POTA organizations in I don't know the number, but quite a number of countries, and growing. There are POTA awards for DXing, so all of those things are possible, and you can double dip or whatever as you want to see it, and do these contests and do the Parks on the Air activations at the same time.
So, Dean, is the California QSO Party making any specific effort to get Parks on the Air activators involved?
Yes, we are. Thank you for asking that. With the help of John and N6U and the Northern California Contest Club, we have an incentive this year for anyone to operate from a POTA location. John, do you want to give the pitch?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Dean said, to encourage people who are either Parks on the Air activators who want to participate in the California QSO Party and maybe haven't given that a try, or for California QSO Party people who want to say, hey, maybe instead of sitting at home with my high noise, let me go out to a park, maybe in a county that's not very active, and give that a try instead. one of the kind of a word overlay, I guess you could say, Dean, is we're going to be offering a prize of a POTA hat, a personalized boonie, as you can see on the screen here, for California QSO Party 2024 with your name and call sign on it, for the top N activators, N to be determined, who operate from a Parks in the Air location and submit that log to Parks in the Air, so we'll cross-check it against the Parks in the Air site, and hopefully that'll encourage some activity there.
And will that promotion be offered to people outside the state or only within the state?
Dean, I guess that's a question for you. I mean, any Parks in the Air, there are Parks in the Air parks anywhere. I think we're mainly thinking about California, but
yeah, I think let's go back and review it. We're breaking some news today here, Kevin. So let's think about that. But I think my sense is we should offer it to anybody. It's going to be difficult, though, if you're outside of the state of California to compete with some of the scores that POTA locations, POTA operators would have inside California. But let's think about that. And certainly we don't want to exclude anybody outside of California. We'll go back and look to see if there's a way we can inspire people outside of California to participate. Kevin, this leads me another thing I want to talk to you about. We have been talking about the California QSO Party. We've been talking about how QSO parties in general lend themselves nicely for portable operation, whether it's mobile, rover, expedition. But it doesn't stop there. Some regular contesters might be wondering, what are other contests where I should try operating from a POTA location? Here's an example that I would pursue. On Wednesday, every Wednesday, there is a CW Ops test. They call it CWT. And it's in different time slots. It's for 1 hour. And every Wednesday, there's a time slot that starts at 19 Zulu. That's in daylight in the United States. So why not go to, if you can, on a Wednesday, why not set up at a POTA location, see what the noise level is there, set up your antenna, operate CWT for an hour, tear down, look, try to make as many contacts as you can before you tear down, and then look at the RBN numbers on reverse beacon and see who else heard you, where else you were heard. Maybe you want to make some antenna adjustments. Maybe that wasn't as low noise as you might think. Not all POTA locations have an S0 noise level. That's a great opportunity to take a look at it with a small commitment. Then expand that into some other contests coming up here, Kevin. Labor Day weekend, there's the CW Ops Open. They're in 4-hour time slots. That's a manageable chunk. Maybe you want to go out with the family to Labor Day, sneak away for 4 hours from a POTA park and operate and see what you can do. That's a great opportunity. There are a lot of other state QSO parties to participate in, including not just California, but other states. If you're in one of those states, you should definitely look at participating there. But also, I want to say this. The ARRL just recently, as in last year, I believe, announced a new overlay. They called it the Limited Antenna Overlay. And what is that? It's a single element, either vertical or if it's a horizontal single element antenna, you're restricted to putting it at a maximum of 50 feet. And they have their own top 10, like for example, in Sweepstakes CW, there's a top 10 box for single op, low power, limited, single op, high power, limited antenna, and so on. This is a tremendous opportunity in all ARRL contests to operate from a POTA location and really get a competitive advantage and try to make the top 10. Try to win your limited antenna overlay, where you may not be able to get top 10 at home. If you're operating from an advantageous location like a POTA park, you might very well win it. And so that's another competitive advantage people should really pursue. Sweepstakes CW might be a great example. It's the first weekend in November. Usually weather is not so bad then. It might be a good opportunity across the U.S. to operate from a park. And in SSCW, people run out of people to work on Sunday. Everybody's looking for new stations. If you went to a POTA location, you would do rather well in Sweepstakes CW.
I'd like to add to that as well, since we're talking about additional opportunities for POTA contesting. We've been talking about HF contesting mostly here today, but if you're a VHF POTA operator, sometimes in the POTA operators operating VHF have difficulty making even the 10 contacts that they want to make to do a park activation. But contest weekends, VHF contest weekends, are really the best times to rack up a lot of VHF and UHF contacts. In June VHF contest, I got number 1 in the limited rover category in the Pacific Division. And I basically started in San Francisco, drove up to Lake Tahoe, worked over that weekend from several spots around Lake Tahoe. Lake Tahoe is itself on a grid boundary, so there's 4 grids circling Lake Tahoe, and worked from six different POTA parks and other locations in 6 different grid squares in California and Nevada, and never ran out of contacts on that VHF weekend, so that was a lot of fun.
I do want to mention one other thing, and that is, what are we doing to grow the contest community, Kevin? I would say, in one sense, contesting is very healthy. We can see that through QSOs made, through logs received, activity on the air. It's strong. But I would also say that the contest community we can no longer sit and call CQ and expect everybody to come to us, whether it's people to come to contest club meetings or whether it's to enter the contest community without making an effort for outreach. We really need to outreach to different groups to keep contesting healthy in the future, 10 years from now. What is a great way to do that? It is to reach out to portable operations, embrace the idea of portable operations, people operating from portable locations, whether it's POTA or SOTA. They're active on HF. They're energetic. They have gear already. They have setup and debug experience in the field. All really good contesting skills. And by the way, we already know who they are. How? Because you can go to the POTA webpage, and as John was saying, POTA operators upload their QSO totals from a given park. You can look at a given park around you, and you can see who activated that park, what was their call sign, look them up on qrz.com, and reach out to them and encourage them to operate in a contest in the future. This is a really important way we need to grow the contest community.
I'll add kind of some outreach in the other direction as well. If you're a contester who's operated portable, and like Dean, you find that you've actually made thousands of contacts from POTA parks and weren't really aware of it, there is no time limit. There's no retrospective time limit on POTA activation. So create an account. Go to POTA.app on the web, create an account, upload your logs. You need to figure out which park you were in, but go through the process, upload your logs, and you might find that you've got all sorts of POTA awards sitting there ready for you to claim from years back.
Well, I've got to say, you've both inspired me to get the gear out of the basement and get back in the car and activate a park. And I also have to add, I have the privilege of talking to the contest crew on a weekly basis, and these are very talented, top of their game contesters like Chris Rolbert, KL9A, Randy Thompson, K5ZD. But what I've noticed is the listeners, the watchers of that program are typically beginners or intermediates. They want to learn more about contesting, and they want to find a way into that niche. So what you've been describing over the past 40 minutes, I think is really helpful. This is a way for people to do it in a manageable way without putting up, again, 300-foot towers in their backyard and multiple Yagis and 3 linear amplifiers. And there's nothing wrong with that either, but I think finding ways to give permission for people to contest and try it is really important, and you guys have accomplished that today. I really appreciate you joining me.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
I've been talking to Dean, N6DE, and John, NN6U. I'm sure you'll hear them on the air during contests, but also specifically during the California QSO Party and at parks, apparently. Thanks for joining me, guys.